Welcome to Feminist Buzzkills, the show that has never had to cave to the whims of Jeff Bezos. I'm Liz Winstead, and I'm joined by my giggling co-host, Moji Alawateo.
Hello. You've heard us talk about the sketchy trend of maternity homes and how they manipulate pregnant people and basically run on an indentured servitude model, putting pregnant people into labor camps until they give birth and then possibly trying to give up their babies for adoption.
Well, there's an even more insidious maternity ranch, and we're going to tell you all about that.
Plus, Arizona has a doctor who is looking for legal ways to get around the 15-week abortion ban. And we're going to tell you what she's doing and also what you can do about it.
And as always, amazing guests. Actor and activist Torrey DeVitto, who you know from Chicago Med, The Vampire Diaries, One Tree Hill, is here to talk about her activism in the reproductive rights movement. And one of our favorite friends of the pod has a new book out. Moji, tell them who it is.
It's Renee Bracey Sherman, Executive Director of We Testify. And now we can add author to her bona fides. And she's here to talk about her new book, Liberating Abortion, which is an incredible history of abortion as told through the experiences of Black and Brown folks. That's all coming up. But first...
Oh my God, so many selfies. The parade was a blast. Make sure you look at our Instagram to see Moji and I as abortion pills.
Just having it up in New York City.
Wow, there was a lot of people. There was a lot of abortion. There was a lot of selfies. It was the perfect way to spend Halloween.
It was a perfect way to spend Halloween, absolutely. With great people as well. We had some incredible volunteers and just the vibes were on point.
And I don't know how you feel, Moji, but this is the last show we're doing before the election. It's our last chance to maybe pitch to folks why they should vote. I think people are feeling a lot of ways.
I mean, we're feeling all kinds of things, but what I definitely feel, I feel that we all always need to vote. And not everybody needs to vote like I vote, but everyone needs to vote. It's the first step in engaging in our democracy. It is not the end all be all. Vote harder is not how we're going to make change, but vote harder is a way to start and establish the parameters for the change that we're fighting for.
I guess my pitch would be, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Politicians won't save us. We have to save ourselves. And so by voting, it's an understanding of how you strategize to actually get what you need. And regardless of the outcome of this election, there's going to be people who want us to be silenced, whether it's people who said, we won, what are you worried about? Let's move on. Or people who want to literally dismantle the freedoms that we enjoy. And I think that I'm voting so that I can literally say with my whole chest, I will not be silenced. And the change that I am fighting for matters. And I'm going to force you to hear me, to whoever that is. And so I feel like I'm fighting to make sure that I am never silenced.
Also, there's so much voter suppression happening, so many people being removed from voter rolls, so many things just happening all over. There's got to be a reason people don't want you to vote. And I say, why let them win without trying?
That's right. It is free. It's what we need to do. And we'll be asking all of our guests who are so good also the same question. So I can't imagine listening to the podcast and saying, I don't know if I'm going to vote. But I think it's important just to put it out there in the world because everyone's imperfect. And to get people on the path of what you need, we have to also commit to be in the fight on election day and beyond.
And beyond. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. That is the pitch for voting.
And we mean it with our whole chest.
We do. And, it's November 1st. And today we have an actual Patreon birthday whose birthday is actually today. Moji, whose birthday is it?
We have PJ Schuster, a Patreon who is supporting our pod and supports the work that we do. And we support your right to have an incredible birthday.
And PJ, because you're from Minnesota, you get a special birthday. Are you ready? Happy, happy birthday to every girl and boy. Hope this very special day will bring you lots of joy. Hope the birthday presents you get from mom and dad will make this very special day the best you've ever had. That's for PJ and for me and for all the Minnesota listeners.
I was going to say, is that the official birthday song of Minnesota? What
it's
is
the
that?
birthday song of from a local children's show called Casey Jones.
Okay.
And everyone in Minnesota knows it. And even like if you're a young kid, your parents sang it to you, so you know it. It's like the universal birthday song of Minnesota. So now y'all know something exciting. Okay.
I'll have to learn it for PJ's next birthday.
That's right.
And now, Liz, it is time for a steaming dump of this week's abortion news.
Okay. Well, the election is near and the anti-abortion overlords are assembling to storm the gates of our uterine walls like the White Walkers at Winterfell.
And they will stop at nothing. Anti-abortion harassholds filed a suit this week claiming any space mandated to keep a distance from a harasshole screaming at a patient entering a clinic violates their constitutional right to free speech. Sorry, Brad, the First Amendment doesn't protect your right to yell whore in a crowded abortion clinic parking lot.
And Texas is the latest state to see doctors fleeing because of the gyno gulag setup if they decide to practice medicine to save lives. We've seen doctors up and leaving Louisiana, Idaho, and other states, and if we don't fight back, the only people left to examine our uteri will be the politicians planning to set up satellite offices in them.
And lastly, anti-abortion conspiracy theorists are spamming the internet with a dubious press release masquerading as facts, claiming that pharmacists are now jumping on the unscientific trend that you can reverse your abortion by slamming a fistful of progesterone like a fun-sized pack of M&Ms. While they try to pass off this medical quackery as fact, do not be fooled. You can't unring a bell, you can't unfuck that bass player, and you cannot abort your abortion.
This has been your steaming news dump. You know, but bass players always get a bad rap.
I mean, they should. Musicians in general, let's just all take a pause. Let's take a pause.
Let's take a pause. Let's celebrate some bass players. Okay. Before we get to our big stories, we just want to remind you that last night, our amazing debate between Anthony Comstock and Tina Smith dropped all over the internet, and it is amazing. You must go watch it, and then you can take some action. If you haven't seen it yet, what are you waiting for? If you go to repealthecomstockact.com, you can see the hilarious video, and then you can sign the petition. You can get information and a script to call your senators to ask them to repeal the Comstock Act. Kind of important thing to do as we head into Tuesday. That can be your action item before you go to the polls. All right, let's get to our big stories because we have some good ones. Moj, you're going to kick it off this week.
Oh my gosh, I'm actually really excited about this story. I saw it and my ears perked up. So it seems an Arizona abortion provider has found a way to legally provide abortion care to patients who are suffering from miscarriages that fall outside of the state's 15-week abortion ban. And this is pretty exciting news.
Now, is it just miscarriages?
It's miscarriage and it's fetal anomalies. It's not abortion on demand and without apology. No, but it is helpful and it doesn't require people to bleed out with sepsis before getting care.
Talk a little bit about it.
All right. So this is really great. We hear about all of these people bleeding out in states with abortion bans, and that is because the penalties for doctors are really intense, right? In Arizona, it's 2 to 5 years in prison. In Texas, it's life in prison and $100,000 in fees, right? So these are the risks that doctors take on. And this is why they leave patients suffering, because that's a really huge risk.
Well, also, Arizona has had a roller coaster of an abortion ban journey that dates back a bazillion years. I just want to give folks a little bit of context.
I love a context.
Do you love a context? Okay, great. So creepy ass governor in 2021, pre-Dobbs, signed a fetal personhood bull.
Bull. You can call it bull. It's a fetal personhood bull.
I like that. A fetal personhood bull into law that immediately ignited a court challenge, prompting, federal courts to swiftly block the implementation. And then later that year, signed a bill preventing abortion from being performed strictly on the basis of genetic anomaly. A few months after that, that bill was blocked by a federal judge who ruled that it's unconstitutional.
This is when Roe was law of the land. So, of course, it was unconstitutional.
Exactly. So then in 2022, 3 months before the overturning of Roe, this creepy governor signs a 15-week abortion ban that included language declaring that it couldn't override an 1864 law that was on the books. So Arizona had a law worse than the Comstock Act, earlier than the Comstock Act, created by this literal pedophile who kept marrying like 3 different girls under the age of 15 in 3 different states. And that law never got overturned. So there was this wild debate around which law do we have? Do we have a 15-week abortion ban, or do we have this incoherent draconian law from 1864? And they ruled for a hot second that the 1864 law was the law of the land.
I remember that because that was recent history.
Recent history. That was like within the last year.
Yes.
So that bubbled up. I mean, it was so, as you can imagine, wildly unpopular that even the Republicans repealed that 1864 law, but it had to have public outrage. And then they were stuck with this 15-week abortion ban. And so that's kind of where we're at in the
Arizona.
Landscape in the context of Arizona.
Right now.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, the penalty for violating this ban for doctors is 2 to 5 years in prison if convicted. And that doesn't even go into like licensure and whatever. So because of these, doctors are just asked to watch people suffer when they have miscarriages, right? Watch people suffer when they have fetal anomalies. It's called, this type of medicine, when doctors basically have to do this waiting, it's called defensive medicine. And it basically, it prioritizes protecting the physician, but it doesn't really necessarily prioritize the best interest of the patients. So we're in Arizona. We have this 15-week ban. Doctors have a lot to risk. And this doctor has found a legal way to circumvent these restrictions and provide care for her patients.
So how does she do it?
This is pretty great. So what happens is that creepy governor you talked about before, he's gone. So they have a Democratic governor now, and they also have a Democratic AG.
People, we're going to talk about voting as much as we can.
Yes, we should.
The attorney general of your state can decide whether to utilize these shitty laws and prosecute on them, or to not prioritize these laws and not prosecute, or work to get them off the books. So voting for your attorney general is clutch.
And voting for your governor is clutch. And making sure you have ones that have your interest in mind.
Yes.
So now in Arizona, they have a friendly governor. They have a friendly AG who is not interested in actually enforcing this ban. And so some state representatives sent a letter saying, hey, AG, what are the requirements for what constitutes a medical emergency that would allow someone to have care outside of a 15-week ban? And they sent this as a formal letter, and she responded.
What'd she say?
Well, 2 things. First, the physician must exercise clinical judgment. Basically, just be a physician and evaluate, right? And this is a medical concept, and it stands up in the court of law. And then second, the physician has to determine in good faith that based on their clinical judgment, the abortion would avert death. A delay would create substantial and irreversible impairment to major bodily functions, and that this is the best course of action for someone. And so once the treating physician had looked at these 2 things, then the statute allows them to perform an abortion immediately and doesn't require them to wait for a patient to deteriorate or inch closer to death.
This should be textbook for all these other states, right? Like Idaho and Texas and like Indiana, Missouri, the slew of states that are putting this ambiguity around what a physician can and can't do. And to be able to have this, please give us clarity. What does this look like? What is the handbook? Just, looking at how Ken Paxton, the AG, would answer this, right? Versus how this AG, who is actually doesn't want people to die, would answer. It's really astounding how 2 different people who are not doctors, but are like law enforcement, have very different skewed agendas based on what they want their outcomes to be. It's not like they care about the law, they care about the outcomes and then fudge the law around the outcome that they want.
And this is the bare minimum, right? This is just saying that people don't have to be close to death, affirming, this is just an AG affirming that people don't have to be close to death to get the healthcare that they are due. And so because she has this paper and other things, the doctor kind of holds them up, does her clinical assessment, and then outside of the 15 ban can assess as a doctor who was trained to do this, that a person needs care and then provide that care.
It's great. Good for her.
I want to say, like, this sounds great and I make it sound great, but it is not without legal risk, right? Like a county AG can decide that actually this is a little too much clarity for them. A change of a governor or AG could maybe make someone want to retroactively go after these. Like, this is not a solution. This is a Band-Aid.
And so, Arizona's got a ballot initiative, y'all. You're in Arizona.
Exactly. Arizona has a ballot initiative, and early voting in Arizona ends today, November 1st.
So get your vote on and vote yes on Prop 139 so that we could actually get some expansive access to abortion without having to run through hoops and have government intervention. So as Moji said.
Exactly. And then you can go on Election Day, November 5th, and also cast a ballot that day. So if you haven't already, Arizonans, go out, get it done, protect yourselves, protect your neighbors, protect the people around you, and support Proposition 139.
There it is.
Also, I want to say that she's the only person doing this. The hospitals aren't doing this. Other people aren't doing this. This is a level of risk that other people haven't been willing to take on. So I also want to just commend this doctor for looking and saying, like, I can do this. And I see that I have some things in my tool belt and I'm going to use them.
And you can read all about this doctor and her clinic, which is the Camelback Clinic. And we supported them when Operation Save America was out there harassing them in 2021. And it's a beautiful clinic. They're lovely people. And I like people that, no pun intended, think outside the box.
And are nervy. Speaking of nerve, Liz, it seems like in Georgia, we got some nervy people.
This is a story that came across and I was like, I really wanted to break it down because it is next level. So last weekend, the annual Aryan Nation Freedom Fest happened near Athens, Georgia. It's a fun gathering where Nazis from 26 states come for games, vendors, guest speakers. I'm reading the poster, performances from neo-Nazi rock groups like Empire Falls. No, we will not play a clip.
Please no.
The day capped off with a swastika lighting at dusk.
That sounds like the worst festival in the world, Liz.
It also sounds like there's this kind of Nazi festival like every weekend. So why am I talking about this particular one?
All right. Why are we talking about this one, Liz?
So as y'all know, we work with a bunch of incredible organizations that help us link white nationalists and neo-Nazis and the Klan to anti-abortion folks, right? People like Cass Troy from the Cassandra Project in particular. Now, Cass and I were talking, and she brought to our attention that some folks at the Atlanta Anti-Fascist Organization had discovered that this year's rally was being held in Georgia on a huge piece of land behind a house. And that's like, okay, Liz, where are you going? Well, the house is registered to somebody named George Haney. And George Haney and his wife, Shannon, own a maternity ranch or
Yikes.
maternity house. Yeah. So you've heard us talk about maternity ranches on the pod before. They're basically these anti-abortion people who find vulnerable pregnant folks and then say, we'll take care of you during your pregnancy. And they turn them into indentured servants. They make them do like lawn work and painting and housework. Sometimes the conditions that they actually sleep in are not great. And that's in exchange for a place to stay while they're pregnant and food and the gift of being indoctrinated by their Christian bullshit.
Yeah, the indoctrination comes free as a fun side effect.
And just the shame of being pregnant and all of that, right? If they plan to keep their baby, these maternity homes rarely help provide for them after the baby is born. And the thing about them is that they're often taxpayer funded. And basically, it's just another anti-abortion grift to get free labor and to get tax money and to brainwash people into the Christian world.
And charity money and no regulation. It's basically, to me, it feels like a fake clinic that like comes into actual self-actualization.
That has bunk beds.
Exactly.
So back to the Haynes Pregnancy Center, because they take it to the next level. This isn't just a let's save the baby's Christian home kind of thing. This is a save the neo-Nazi white race babies.
Oh, what a terrible twist.
Maternity homes. So it's not like they're taking people in and saving. You have to be an avowed neo-Nazi who has a somehow guaranteed white baby, and that you would never have a mixed race baby, and that you are invested in continuing the purity of the white race. Now, do they spell it out like that on their website? No, but they have code words. So first of all, you know that they are neo-Nazis because the neo-Nazi hate fest is on their property.
Yeah, there's not enough rental fees in the world to take that on if you're not really down with the cause.
Exactly. Now, I want to be clear. It's not on the property where the maternity home is. It's on the actual property of the Shannon and Mr. Haney. And every time I say Mr. Haney, I think of Green Acres. So George Haney. So I did some research on this maternity home, and it's called Schatzkind, which in German means treasure or treasure child. But here's just how they phrase it. We believe our children are our greatest treasure and our priceless heritage. Everything we do is to support the people guarding and developing the potential of our precious children to ensure the future prosperity of our people and our folk. Now, our people and our folk, or our folkways, is code that they talk about when they are talking about white race, racial purity, and all of that stuff.
You know, Liz, when I first went on the website and explored it, I didn't know definitively it was a neo-Nazi white supremacist maternity home. I just knew it was a maternity home, which always pricks my ear up. But as I was reading, I was just like, there's something extra. There's an extra layer of wild here that I don't get. And the our folk was absolutely not knowing definitively that it was white supremacist talk, but just feeling like it gave me the ick. That's what I'm saying. It gave me the ick.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen to the mission statement: to nurture and protect the treasured bond between mother and child by providing a secure living space encircled by our community, steeped in our folkways, and guarded by our sacred honor. So it's very much white people for white people, protecting white people and the white race. So I was like, okay, who are these people, right? So at first I tried to do a deep dive on the dude that owns it. George, his internet footprint is almost nothing. Like, you can't find anything. And then I went down the rabbit hole on Shannon, and these people are smart as fuck. They do not present as Christian. There's like hints, but not really. She sells shit on Poshmark. Her Instagram is like her white children, and they're riding ponies, and they're
playing violin,
and they're doing all that stuff. And then I went to her Etsy page, and she's selling like t-shirts that say like crop top, and it's like an ear of corn on a shirt. And then it's like some other, like, live, love, laugh. And then all of a sudden there's a hand carved shiv. And I'm like, wow, that creeps me out. And her Instagram was so weird because it was like all this sort of like hippie mom, trad wifey stuff. And then there was one post that was like, make Orwell irrelevant again. And I was like, wow, okay.
It was very definitely trad wifey, and it was definitely like homeschool forward, which to me is very much a red flag. But I was also like, I'm not seeing the evidence I want to see of like true white supremacist insanity.
Until you go to the board of directors. And one of their board of directors is a guy named like DJ. I'm sure this isn't his real name, DJ Cogdill or Cogdill.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go to his Twitter page, and man, this guy leaves no stone unturned about his feelings. It's all posting about the white race, preserving the white race, and all of this kind of shit. And it is so terrifying. And I was like, people need to understand that these pregnancy homes have a history of being run by very terrifying anti-abortion extremists.
I don't know if you remember the maternity home run by Joan Andrews Bell. Do you remember this?
I do. She is an OG anti-abortion extremist who was part of the Army of God in the 70s and 80s. And she was one of the people. The Army of God were the people that were the most violent anti-abortion extremists, and they were the ones who crafted this doctrine that many religious leaders signed that said that you are excused by God for murdering abortion doctors because you're doing something greater to God by killing abortion providers.
And she ran a maternity home until she was sentenced to 27 months in prison for violating federal laws connected to her stalking abortion clinics.
And she also employed one murder of an abortion doctor named James Charles Kopp, who killed Dr. Barnett Slepian, who was a physician in Buffalo, New York. And Charles Kopp murdered him while he was cooking soup in his kitchen. And while she's in jail, her family is running her maternity home. And she also had a partner who was a Klan member who also ran a pregnancy home. It was called Our Father's House, which began as a Christian ministry and a shelter for unwed mothers. And then later became this weird private reform school for troubled teen girls. And he was arrested for molesting a 15-year-old girl who was living there and thrown in jail. And not only was this dude a sexual assaulter,
he was also a spiritual advisor, an extremist movement spiritual advisor. And he was like giving justification, basically religious justification for the acts of John Brokaw. I don't know if you remember, but he bombed
clinics. He also was spiritual advisor to Paul Hill, who murdered Dr. John Britton and John Britton's bodyguard in Florida. And he was also the spiritual advisor to Michael Griffin, who murdered Dr. David Gunn. So it's just like, this is a history and these are lessons. And when you hear the term maternity home, I just want everybody to understand that you got to do research, because it is the next level scariness of what a fake clinic can talk someone into going to next. And if this is some of the support that fake clinics are offering to go to a place that is run by a Nazi, a Klan person, a Nazi Klan person who's also advising people spiritually to murder abortion doctors, I mean, this is what we're talking about.
How do you protect yourself from this, Liz?
Information. I think that we need to be telling these stories more so that folks can really find out like where we're at and that this is really out there. And I think, tell your friends. We're going to put links in the show notes as well. This is really a crucial trend that I'm really glad anytime we can connect the dots and show people that it's not nuns with rosaries. And even the nuns with rosaries are part of insidious organizations sometimes that are terrorists.
And they're violent people who are preying on people at their most vulnerable, right? Preying on people when they really need true support and bringing their crazy ideologies.
And I think we should transition to our guest.
We have incredible guests, and I can't wait to talk to them. Our first guest is one of our Repro besties, the founder and executive director for We Testify, an org dedicated to abortion storytelling. She's been called the Beyonce of abortion, and we can't wait to chat with her about her new book, Liberating Abortion, which she co-authored with Regina Mahone. Please welcome Renee Bracey Sherman. Hi, Renee.
Renee.
Hi, friends.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So your book, Liberating Abortion, is one of the most important abortion books, mostly because it tells the history of abortion through the Black and Brown experience. Why is it crucial for people to hear abortion history from this perspective?
One of the things that was always really interesting to me is reading books on the history of abortion that sort of started at or just before Roe or started at criminalization. And it felt like it was missing what we were all doing, what our ancestors were all doing at that time. But also it really started at the problem and the when colonialism or white supremacy was stopping access to abortion, but there wasn't a whole lot of interrogating, again, what we were doing prior to that. And so when Regina and I started thinking about writing of this moment and writing ourselves back into history, we really wanted to go all the way back and say, what were our ancestors doing? What were the teas or the pessaries that they were making? How were we, folks of color all around the world and throughout the Americas, having abortions? So much that it was part of colonialism and part of this control that when white folks colonized different lands, stopping abortion was part of that. And so we really wanted to look at the history of how we've been liberating abortion for, as it turns out, 6,500 years.
Only 600, 5,000? Okay.
Wait a minute. I thought the earth was only 6,000 years old, Renee.
So here's the thing. Yes, if you have a certain science class, yes, that might be true, Liz. But what I do think is really important is understanding that this is something that has been very common. And this moment that we're experiencing and the shame and the stigma is sort of a newfangled thing in the long history of people. And when we start to think about that and to recognize that our ancestors have been trying to liberate abortion for a long, long time. And this moment is hard, but it is one moment that we can continue to move forward from. And we can, use the audacity of our ancestors to liberate abortion for the future.
Well, that leads nicely into my next question, because you are a research nerd to begin with. And I feel like whenever I talk to you about abortion, it always has a context, right? It's never just like, let's talk about abortion. It's always like putting this contextual.
Yeah.
When are we talking about it? How are we talking about it? Who's the person we're talking about? What is their experience? It could be a really fun party game, I think, if we invented it. But in looking at the research and telling these stories of incredible Black and brown women who were at the forefront of doing a lot, you must have gone in knowing there were stories of people that you desperately wanted to tell, that people needed to know. You also uncover stuff in your research of somebody you might not have known who you're like, holy shit, this is so cool. So first, let's talk about somebody whose life and work you wanted to make sure was front and center in this book because they didn't get their props and flowers. And then let's talk about the person you discovered in your research.
Yeah. So, we read over 100 books for this. We looked through all sorts of research papers and just different things. We went to Smith College, to their library, and looked at archival papers that were over 100 years old. It was truly this fun nerd experience that I absolutely loved. One, I think for this question is that we always knew the story of Jane, the folks of Jane who provided abortions in Chicago before it was legal. But the story we'd always been told was that, it was these white women who just wanted to provide abortions in Chicago. And we felt like there had to have been at least one of color somewhere, right? And so we started doing some research and knew that these people had to exist, and we had to be able to find them to interview them. In Laura Kaplan's book, The Story of Jane, there are 2 Black women who are interviewed under aliases. And so we were like, how do we retell their story? How do we tell the story of Jane, centering them and their perspective and their beliefs? And we did a little digging and connected with the producers on the Jane documentary and connected with Marie and talked to her. And it was just this beautiful experience because she's sort of been doing Black liberation organizing for a long time. And her house was one of the houses that they provided abortions at. And then when we talked to Laura Kaplan, the author of The Story of Jane, she connected us to Saki. She provided abortions and ran a clinic after, and she did counseling and all of that. And it was so exciting to be able to tell the story of Jane, but recenter their work, recenter their connection, and how they had Black women in their hearts as they were doing this work. And I think it was just really beautiful to tell this story in a way that centered their politics, their connections, and their vision of Black liberation, whether it was following Malcolm X or the Panthers, and how abortion was part of that. And I think that fundamentally tells a different story.
I'd like to just continue on this for a hot second, because as we all know, when it comes to radical change and when it comes to radical change that involves liberation outside the law, Black and brown women have a different repercussion if they're found out, right?
Right.
So how did they talk about putting themselves in that position and saying, fuck it, this is where I want to be? Was the repercussions even considered?
Yeah. So it's interesting because they actually had two very different perspectives on it. Marie had already been doing a lot of work with Black liberation movements, and she was being followed by the Red Squad, which was a police investigative unit that was going after Black liberation activists. So she was already deep into activism. But when some of the women of Jane were arrested, she was like, this is getting too close. I don't want to go to jail. So she stepped back. Sakina, on the other hand, we asked her if there was anything that scared her about having people at her house doing the counseling, doing this work. And she was like, absolutely not. In fact, she said that the criminality of it or the risk was actually what thrilled her. And she brought her entire family as part of it. Like her young daughter helped pass the note cards out and hand out the Kool-Aid and the cookies to the women who came to their house for the counseling. So it really became a family affair. And, she felt like this is worth the risk. This is how we show up. And we tell in the book this one story where she said she comes into her house and this woman follows her inside and asks her, Jane? And so she's with her daughter and turns and is like, not really acknowledging anything, worried. And then the woman sort of looks at her and says, I've been to your house. I just don't remember what floor you were on. And so she was like, okay, she clearly knows something. And she's like, I'm on the 10th floor. And the woman goes, okay. And then she leaves. And then she said every week for the next 10 weeks, she put $10 under the door to pay back the $100 for the abortion. And she was just like, this is who we were dealing with. So we were in it together. She didn't really feel like there was a real risk.
I love that you went hunting for these women, that you were like, I know that they're there, that almost like how scientists look, when they're in space and they're like, we can tell from the gravity well that there's something here, we just can't see it. But I want to go to the second part of Liz's question. What was something you uncovered that you were just like, I didn't even know to look for this, and this is incredible?
Yeah. So one of the things that always sat with me uncomfortably or frustratingly was when reading books about the history of abortion during the criminalization time in the 1800s and early 1900s. It was very, all the women are white, all the men are Black, but some of us are brave. And so none of the folks of color were covered. And it was truly always like the Madame Restels or the Margaret Sangers or the Dr. T.R.M. Howards. All of these people worked great and did amazing work and whatever. But where were the folks of color? And I talked to Alicia Gutierrez Romine, who wrote this amazing book called From the Back Alley to the Border, which everyone should read. And she was like, well, maybe they weren't caught by police, or maybe the community protected them. Maybe they flew under the radar. We have no idea. So I started digging in some newspaper, and it was the newspaper.com account. And I just started digging and digging, and I started looking up keywords of the time. So looking up botched procedure, a pregnancy procedure, all sorts of things like this, death, septicemia, or whatever it was, plus Black midwife, Negro midwife, negress, things that they would have said at the time. And I ended up finding dozens of folks who were arrested of color. And then we were able to tell the stories of a couple of them and give them their flowers and say that they did exist. One in particular is Mildred Campbell, who ran an inn for women to come stay at in Washington, D.C. And she delivered babies and allegedly provided abortions. And the first time she was in the newspaper in the late 1800s was because one of her alleged patients, Abby Comfer, died as a result of an abortion. And she went on trial. She actually was acquitted, which was kind of weird because you're like, a jury of her peers in the 1890s is going to be all white dudes, right?
It's a bunch of white men. Yeah.
But that also shows the attitudes towards abortion at the time. They did not see it as a crime. And, she did have a couple other patients died, and she was arrested a couple more times. The question we were sitting with was, does that make her a bad provider? And it's like, well, no, we don't know what the denominator was. Clearly, people kept coming to stay at her inn. But also, you have to remember the time period. Germ theory and washing your hands was cutting edge science. Everyone was dying from any sort of health, everything.
Something, yes. It was bad airs, not, viruses.
So doesn't necessarily make her a bad provider. But what I think is really important is that we point out that we were there, that folks who looked like us were of the time. And it felt really amazing to write them back into history, because There have been a couple of books written about Madame Restell. There's been over a dozen books written about Margaret Sanger. And yet here you've got Mildred Campbell, who's around the same time. And she's like nowhere to be found, right? And I think I both was really excited to be able to tell this story and find her and another woman named Virginia King, whose story we tell. But also, I have to be honest, it actually made me really angry because their stories were right there. So there's just been laziness around the history and telling the history of abortion. And that laziness leads to the exclusion of Black and brown folks who've been doing this work for a long time.
How incredible that you found this. And I mean, it does absolutely speak to laziness and the erasure of Black and brown
Right.
people that continues. Like, let's be honest.
I mean, it's kind of goes to why we wrote the book to begin with. I've definitely experienced the erasure of like my own work. I've watched the erasure or the gentrification of reproductive justice as a framework. And so I think it's really important that we write ourselves back into history and that we say we were here and we were doing this work. And to me, it felt like a book was a great vehicle to be able to do that, to document this long history and these ancestors whose legacy we continue.
What do you think the light bulb moments that readers have talked to you about after they've read it and people have come up to you to talk to you? What have they said about that aspect and that greater aspect of just the book as a whole?
I think what has been really exciting to hear, the thing I hear constantly is, I didn't know that. I learned so much. And this is coming from, folks who are seasoned reproductive rights and abortion activists, reporters who cover this, to folks who just really care, midwives, nurses, like all of us. I think we don't realize how much of a sanitized, whitewashed history that we've been taught. And it really just like fills my heart just with such joy and gratitude that people are really loving all of these like nerdy things that I found in the like research. I mean, the truth is that the book is double the size what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be like 75 to 100,000 words. We turned in over 150,000 words. And, we really fought for all of it to be in there. I mean, not that HarperCollins like really like wanted to censor us, but they were kind of like, we can put some of this online. And we're like, no, we want all of this in here because we want it all in one place. That was what was so challenging, was that we'd find these little nuggets of information in so many different books and so many different research papers. And it was like, can we just put everything in one place? Here's everything you need to know about abortion. Here's their starting guide on abortion that actually includes us this time. And so we hope that this book will then have a little something for everyone and help them see where they fit in the movement to liberate abortion, whether it's you love plants and you're like, man, I should start planting more Queen Anne's lace in my backyard, or, you want to know what your ancestors were doing, or you care about self-managed abortion now, or you care about pregnancy justice. We have a whole chapter on sexuality and pleasure and talking about masturbation and the connection between all of this, right? There's always just like something in there for everyone. And so the fact that people find their little nugget and are learning lots of things is really just so joyful.
That's awesome.
It is so joyful. And I really do like this idea of like an encyclopedia of abortion that involves all of us, right? We talked about, of course, the people you had to excavate, but there's also like living like contemporary icons that you speak to. What are the commonalities you found in their experiences, and what are the takeaways that you learned that maybe you hadn't considered going into your interviews?
It's funny. We started doing some of the interviews, and we started out with a really simple question for everyone that we interviewed with like, when's the first time that you learned about or heard about abortion? And our very first interview was with Professor Michelle Goodwin. She starts telling this story about being in a doctor's office and hearing abortion. And we're listening to her talk, and all of a sudden we realize, like, wait a second, why were you in the doctor's office? And how old were you? And so she starts telling us it's about when she had an abortion. And, we had interviewed her because of her legal expertise and breadth of experience, right? Because she's brilliant.
Right.
And so she tells the story. And after our interview, she later sent us an email and was like, well, I realized that I'm going to share my abortion story. And then she wrote it in the New York Times, right?
Yes.
It was this aha moment of that we could showcase not only abortion storytellers as people who've had abortions and talking about this work, but also as the leaders who are breaking new ground and telling a new story as well. And it led us to interview over 50 people of color who've had abortions. And we were so proud of that because there's sort of this assumption that couldn't be done, or that, you have to center whiteness and white experts, and you don't. You really don't.
You really don't.
They're out there. You just have to want to look. You have to not be lazy about it. Like in the last week, there have been 2 articles that have come out with the best books on reproductive rights or whatever. And none of them include the books that have come out this year. But also one of them, it's just written by all white people. And the other list is majority white people. I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. But like the way in which even the scholarship that we have out there by Black and brown people is ignored, it's truly just wild. Like the erasure is still happening right now.
And there's no plot for it to end anytime soon.
There's like 10 or 12 books on abortion that have come out this year. And like a bunch of them are written by people of color. Like Shefali Luthra's book is like nominated for a Kirkus Prize and it isn't on these lists. Like what?
Oh, undue burden.
Right here on my shelf.
But it is just like the way in which we can get erased in real time and the amount of research. I mean, this book is 416 pages. We did research and interviews for 5 years. We are trying to elevate the voices of people who are also doing this work now. So that way, you know that this isn't a thing that like has happened in the past. It is people who are doing amazing work today and will be doing that work. And I think they're motivated to do it because they had abortions. And I think that we deserve to be centered in our own movement and in this history and in our work.
So Renee, this is so great. And everybody, please get this book. It is so important. You know Renee, she's like a regular on our pod and always brings the joy. So we're doing something on the spotty a little bit. We are asking all of our guests, and Moji and I have also weighed in. This is the last podcast before the election.
Mm-hmm.
What would your pitch be to somebody to tell them why they should vote?
I'm actually going to borrow something that my dear friend Ravina Daptari said to me yesterday when we were having this discussion. And she said, as Americans, we are living in this like imperialist nation in the world, right? And it's really complicated for those of us who have really big hearts and think about all of this work globally. And she said, pick who you want your next opponent to be, because it is who do you want to argue with?
It's who you want to organize under.
Yeah. And I think Joe Biden was absolutely not my candidate. And I spent 4 years dragging him for doing whatever the fuck he didn't do. Like
right.
The uselessness, right? I will say it can be easier. What is a challenge as an organizer is that when there's someone who's supposedly on our side, it can be hard to also galvanize people to organize just as hard for progress. So that I think makes those of us who have big hearts and big policy agendas and ideas, it can make our jobs really hard. So our jobs are hard no matter what. It's like whatever level it is, choose your opposition.
I think that those are really great words. And thank you for sharing them. And thank you for this book and for how great it is. And just for being a comrade with us.
Aww, I love you guys.
Tell people where they can find you, Renee.
I mean, I'm constantly on the internet, everyone. But you can find links to buy the book at your favorite bookseller at liberatingabortion.org. Of course, you can find it at your favorite local bookstore. If they don't have it, you can ask them to order it. And if you want a taste of the book, you can listen to the podcast that Regina and I had that came out in January. It's called The A-Files, A Secret History of Abortion. If you like an audiobook, Liberating Abortion also is an audiobook too. So yeah, get it anywhere. And then of course, find We Testify at wetestify.org. And if you want to share your abortion story, fill out a form. Like we're always open to support people because we're going to need to keep organizing no matter what happens.
That is the key, everybody. Voting is a starting line. It ain't no finish. It's barely the beginning.
No, barely.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Liz, we can never do our podcast without the generous help from our fake sponsors. Who is sponsoring our podcast this week?
Well, it's a good one. Looking for a special postage stamp for your holiday cards this year? Why not put the Christian Chronic Masturbator back in Christmas with the special edition Anthony Comstock stamp?
Oh, there are 3 different Anthony Comstock stamps to choose from, each showcasing a different holiday scene from this patriotic postal worker. There's Comstock sniffing your mail under the mistletoe, Comstock ripping open your birth control packages under the tree, or Comstock testing out your vibrators before putting them back in your stocking. You can pick one or get all three.
And the Anthony Comstock Special Edition stamps are fun to use. You will delight in each lick of the backside of Anthony Comstock as you press that sticky goodness on your envelope.
Available at stickitocomstock.com, and between now and December 15th, get 20% off a 3-pack by using the promo code ComstockingStuffer.
The Anthony Comstock Special Edition stamp. This year, send an inch of Comstock with every holiday greeting. Ew.
Ew, so much ick, Liz.
Can you imagine licking the backside of Anthony Comstock?
Not once. You can't pay me enough for that. That's disgusting.
No, it doesn't. I think we need a palate cleanse. How about our next guest?
Let's do it.
We are so thrilled to have actor, activist, and philanthropist Torrey DeVitto in the house. You know her from some of our favorite shows, Chicago Med, Vampire Diaries, One Tree Hill, Pretty Little Liars. I'm going to stop there because I could just have a whole podcast listening to your IMDb page. So please welcome the one and only Torrey DeVitto.
Hi, Torrey.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fantastic. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you. And, I just want to say that the One Tree Hill women are out here doing the most, defending reproductive freedom for sure. You and Sophia Bush specifically, you're just leading on LGBTQ plus rights and abortion rights. And I'm always so thrilled when somebody decides to use their platform, knowing that there can be a lot of bullshit that comes from the public with that. So when did you decide you were just going to be out front and public with your values? And was it a hard decision to make to do so?
No, not for me specifically, because I've always been somebody that's been pretty much an open book. I can't hide how I feel. I can't hide my emotions. And to me, all these categories come down to human rights and, for me, morally, what is right. And so to me, it just doesn't make sense to not speak about that stuff. It just felt so natural to do so. But that's not to say I understand that it's very scary for some people. And I hate when people get bashed because they're like, oh, you don't say enough, this and that. I understand that getting attacked on your social media every day is not for everyone. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But for me, I don't look at the comments like that. And I just have to say what I have to say. And that's it.
Being attacked on social media, that's us. We get attacked on our lives sometimes, which is actually
I bet.
super fun. It's one thing, Torrey, to advocate for reproductive rights broadly, but it's quite another to decide to publicly share your abortion stories, especially as a public figure. And you decided to do so around the time of the Dobbs leak. So can you talk about that time and how you came to the decision to tell your story, and also why you chose People magazine?
I think I was so shocked, and I have been so shocked at all this setback, especially for women. And it's been so harmful and so dangerous. And when all this was coming out, and I thought to myself, my God, I was worried about so much when I got pregnant when I was so young. But the last thing I was worried about was abortion access. I didn't realize what a privilege that was. And I can't imagine if that had been something that I actually had to be worried about on top of everything else going through my mind during that time. And I think being on, some of the shows that you mentioned, especially the younger shows like One Tree Hill and Vampire Diaries and Pretty Little Liars, you quickly learn that you have a young, predominantly female audience, and they're all watching. You know what I mean? And so I feel like, even for me, if I see my favorite actor speak upon something that I feel kind of icky about, I'm like, oh my God, I'm not alone. Anybody that speaks publicly about something, you go, oh, I'm not the only one that goes through that. And so I thought to myself, I am an open book, and I feel like if this story can help someone feel like they're not alone and I've got your back and I'm here fighting for you, then great, let's do it. And yeah, we chose People magazine because I feel like they have a really broad audience, and they were committed to telling my story the way I wanted to tell my story. And so it just felt like it fit.
I love that you chose People for that very reason. Sometimes it's easy to lean in and go to Ms. Magazine, or to go to Feminist Press, or to a place where there's a soft landing, and you went to a place you didn't even think about the soft landing. You thought about the greater reach. And that's what I think is so cool. And just talking to you and hearing you effortlessly lean into your values, I got to ask, did you have support from your parents? Was this something you had to develop on your own? Because that lean in of just like, I am here and I know that it's going to ruffle some feathers, but I'm fine. How did you get that core?
I mean, I've always had support from my parents. My parents are super supportive. And my mom, especially, is very supportive. We share the same views and she's so amazing. But my mom has always been a massive people person. And I think growing up, and this is, I'm not speaking publicly about anything I haven't spoken to her about. I think growing up, seeing this woman that I felt held so much power inside of her and was so amazing, kind of let the people person thing kind of sway her a little bit or kind of control her. I think at a young age, even subconsciously, I started going, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I have to. So yes, it was through the support of my parents to feel free that I could say whatever I want to say, but also it was seeing that sometimes she would stumble on not saying the things she wanted to say. And then I had a commitment of like, okay, I'm going to break that trend in my family now. So it was really a gift.
How did you break that? Like, what did it take to break that? Like, is it becoming an actor? Is it like deciding that like you want to live your life so publicly?
I'm originally from New York. We moved to Florida when I was 11. And I would never live in Florida again.
You've had enough of Florida, man.
But I have to say, I think being in Florida and going to high school in Florida and just being like so cognizant of things that I was just not okay with, that I was like very confused about and didn't really fully understand. That started my voice, I think, a little bit. Because I was like, why do I feel uncomfortable here? What is it about my environment that makes me uncomfortable? What is it about what all the kids are saying around me that makes me uncomfortable? And, starting to be vocal about that and then moving to LA and finding my community and then kind of putting the pieces together, I think that really helped.
The other thing is like reading about where you really hang your hat. The thing that I think I love the most is you are advocating, and I'm saying this because this is a movement term, from womb to tomb, right? And so when you are thinking about a pregnant person and how their life is going to be, and then advocating for people who die with dignity and hospice work, like to me, that is some of the angel shit that happens in the world. And so many people don't experience it. Both of my parents have passed. I went through a hospice situation, and I'm wondering how your hospice advocacy came to be, because it's normally from a super personal place. And if you were willing to talk about that and advocate for that, because it's really incredible.
Yeah. So I was actually doing One Tree Hill. I think I was 24. It was my first time like being on a set like that. And I felt really depressed. Like I was inside all day. There was a lot of stuff going on in that show that's all come out. And there was a lot of egos on that show at the time. And I just felt like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. And so I was like, okay, I want to act. So I'm not going to quit, but maybe I can find something to take my mind off of it. And I actually was Googling children's hospitals to maybe volunteer at or something. And hospice popped up. And I actually did not know what it was. And I clicked on it randomly. And then I called them and they were like, oh, we're happening to start our training this weekend. It goes for 3 weeks. And I was like, great, count me in. And I just fell in love with it. I had no idea. I didn't even know what inpatient care hospice volunteering was. And I just fell in love with it. And it's like, it's this weird thing where it's like, elders hold so much wisdom and so much goodness that we can take from them. And yet at the end, they're just treated like shit most of the time. And so being able to be there, and I quickly realized like, it's very similar to being a part of the birth process, right? Like you're birthing them to whatever is next. Who knows? We don't know. But like it became such a personal experience to me, like something I just felt fully comfortable in. And again, another thing, like I know it's not for everyone. Like all my friends, they were like, you're already depressed. Like, are you sure you want to do this? I was like, no, I swear it's bringing a light to my life. They're like, okay.
That's sometimes the secret of depression, that like maybe just getting into something bigger than yourself will help, pull you out of the individuality that sometimes is what can fuel, obviously not the only reason, but something that can be a part of it.
Definitely.
Torrey, I've been pregnant and fighting for abortion access. You're currently pregnant and fighting for abortion access. What are some of the terrible things that people have said to you because you're pregnant and fighting for abortion access? And what have you said to clap back?
I had somebody create a video of me with the most dramatic, like Passion of the Christ music behind it, telling everybody I was a Nazi and a child murderer and to watch out for me.
Oh, wow.
That was probably one of the crazier ones that I saw. I was like, what? But I think what blows my mind so deeply is, when they just make it about choice. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to come into your home and try to change up your beliefs and your religion, whatever you want to be. But hear me out. Why should a 10-year-old that's raped have to have a child? Why? Explain that to me. As somebody who's gone through rape and incest, why should they have to carry that to full term? Why should any child have to carry that to full term? Explain that to me. It's like when I can't get those points across and when people have something to say about that, that hurts me because I'm like, why would you put, and who are you to tell an 11-year-old she needs to give birth? That is crazy to me.
And it feels like they're invested in punishing people.
Yeah.
100%. And it's like, why? They went through something so horrible already. Or, the woman who can't get the medical help she needs because it would be considered an abortion could potentially die of sepsis. Like, that's okay with you? And then when we talk about once the baby's out, and let's talk about the same people that didn't want her to have the abortion and then all of a sudden don't support childcare. It's just mind blowing to me. Like that whole thing, like you care about the fetus, but you don't actually care about the baby. Like it literally hurts me.
I've often said we're not potting soil. And you hear sometimes language like that women are the vessel. And, you hear this like arcane language of reducing us back to property and to sort of one purpose. And it's really wild.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you are jamming on Instagram with your show. You're talking about everything with everyone.
Yeah.
And I really love it. And I was like, what was your impetus for it's not a podcast. You're doing these Instagram lives that are called Stream of Consciousness. And so what was your impetus for taking the time to just cover all the things you love and to do it on Instagram and not in a podcast form?
I feel like I love getting information. I was like, God, if I could just talk to these people for 15, 20 minutes and people could listen, how cool would that be? And so we just kind of started asking random people, would you like to be on this idea?
Do you have a favorite episode of somebody who blew you away?
It's so funny because I always think I do. And then the next one I do, I get off of it and I'm like, oh my God, that was amazing. The last person I had on, though, was amazing. Lucy Jones. She wrote the book Matrescence. And that book, I actually was fangirling when she said she would do the IG Live because that book blew my mind. Pregnancy has been so not what I thought it was going to be, such a challenging experience. And her book is so raw about pregnancy and motherhood and honest. And I just love that. So that was really cool for me.
Oh, that's good. And we'll put that in the link because anytime any myths can be debunked, they put us on this path, right? If you have a uterus, they put you on a path and then it's all kind of a guessing game. And then we don't want to scare off young women to talk about menopause, what pregnancy is, leaking, sneezing, all of it, right? And so I think whenever people write those books, they're Bibles for how we should be thinking.
Yeah.
And for all people, whether or not you decide to have a child, I feel like it's important information to know. I got pregnant later in life and I feel like there's all kind of crap I learned about bodies that I was I've lived a whole life without even knowing this. And now I'm looking at perimenopause and I'm like, what's happening here? No one's telling me anything.
No, it's crazy. Every time we go through something, I look at my husband and I'm like, why don't I know this about myself? Why don't I know that that's how that works? Why? That's crazy. And then it's you're saying it's good for everybody. It is he learned so much too. And I am very open and vocal with him. I'm like, babe, what's this? What's happening to me now? He's like, oh my God, let me Google. I don't know. It takes two to get pregnant. Everybody should know this stuff.
We should all know this.
But don't you feel like you know everything about the penis?
Yeah.
I feel like we know every single thing there is to know about the penis, about balls, about everything. and nobody knows anything about our junk.
No, it's too complex. That's why. And it's but we live in a world that lives on a male circadian rhythm anyways. I mean, I actually was pretty old when I realized women are on a 4-week rhythm and men are on the 24-hour and we live in a 24-hour world and we're supposed to rise up to that and just be okay with that while also dealing with how amazing and beautiful, like our menstrual cycles and all these things that we should be honoring, but we're not because we live in a very male dominated world. It's like, why am I learning this stuff in my 30s?
Right.
Yeah.
Why did I not know what a luteal phase was until I was like 35 years old?
I was also like 30 when I discovered what that was. It's wild.
That's crazy.
And I've had this body my whole life. Like,
I've been walking around with it and I didn't even know what it was doing. It's crazy.
I know. And yet those that suppress the information, don't know the information, are the ones that are first in line to decide and set a set of legislation that tells us what we should do with these carcasses that we walk around in. It is maddening. So we have to wrap up, Torrey, but we're asking everybody on the show, because this is our last podcast before the election. And so we're asking our guests, what is your pitch to somebody about why they should go out and vote?
Oh my gosh. Well, voting is such an honor and a privilege. And I think we forget that in this country. I read a Gloria Steinem quote where she said, basically, voting is the one thing that makes us all equal. Doesn't matter if you're a billionaire or you have $5 in your pocket, you go and vote, and your vote matters just as much as everybody else. And your vote does count. It does count. Everybody's vote counts. And look around you and look at the people you love and see how your vote will impact them, and really, really think about it. Don't just look at like the broad strokes, like really think about how to impact not just you, but everyone around you.
I love that.
That's awesome.
That's such a beautiful way of putting it.
Perfect. Please come back and talk to us again, because the one thing we didn't get to talk to you about is I feel like we should do some kind of TV holiday movie around abortion.
Yeah.
Girl goes home to save her abortion clinic from closing, open up the tree farm, have an abortion clinic. I don't know. But Torrey, I feel like you're the person to do it.
I love that. I would love that. Sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll talk to you on the flip side of a brand new day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Torrey. You can find Torrey on Instagram at Torrey DeVitto, and her Instagram live series, Stream of Consciousness, can be found on her Instagram. Links will be found in our show notes. Liz, that's our show. Thanks for listening. And thanks again to Renee Bracey Sherman. Liberating Abortion is out now and can be found at liberatingabortion.org.
Did we make you smarter today? Make you laugh? Show us some love by liking, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating. Plus, stay connected with us on social media platforms at Abortion Front across all platforms. And if you really love us, please vote.
And a reminder, the Tina Smith Comstock debate is up. Don't just sit on the sidelines, get in on the action. One thing you can do now is demand our legislators repeal the Comstock Act. Visit repealthecomstockact.com and sign our petition today.
And looking for where you might fit in to do some abortion activism? We have a 5-part activist training series called Operation Save Abortion. You know that. Our latest training is about how you can get involved in helping get state ballot initiatives passed on Tuesday. So maybe spend the weekend getting involved. It's a great webinar with companion toolkits so that you can pick a state and get to work. Let's get on this. Let's get these things passed. You can go to operationsaveabortion.com and get your marching orders.
And while you're there, visit our activist calendar, which is full of other local and national actions and educational opportunities. This week's featured action is for our New York-based activists. On November 19th at 7 p.m., head on over to 54 Below for The Spell of Red River, a witchy new musical with a star-studded cast making its New York debut. And a portion of the show's proceeds will be donated to abortion care for Tennessee. The link can be found in our activist calendar and show notes.
And next week, make sure you join us for a special post-election deep dive. Our wonderful guest is the one and only Jessica Valenti, creator of the must-read Substack, Abortion Every Day, and author of the New York Times bestseller, Abortion, Our Bodies, Their Lies, and the Truths We Use to Win. Plus, a roundtable discussion with some of our amazing AAF team. Our comms director, Kara McLean, and programs director Kristen Haiti join us to talk about the results from the state, local, and presidential elections and what kind of activism landscape we're going to be handed as we move into 2025. And please go vote.
And one thing you can do while you're on your voting line is join our Patreon. You'll support great content and get cool FBK merch and experiences. So go on over and join. All pledges support this pod and all of our activism at Abortion Access Front. Pledge at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills. FBK is edited by Remy DeTournay and is produced by Abortion Access Front.
And finally, we leave you with sentient shitsmear, Pastor Joel Webbin, a man showing his whole ass with his plan to give cheaters the chair. And this is why, again, Moji, say it with me. We need
to go
you
vote.
To go vote. Go vote. Go vote. Listen to the shithead and go vote.
In a just society, adulterers would be punished as criminals, and in some cases, Calvin would probably argue in many or most cases, the penalty would be capital punishment, in which case divorce would not be necessary because there would not be a spouse left living to divorce.
Feminist Buzzkills, the podcast from Abortion Access Front. New episodes drop Friday. When BS is poppin', we pop off. And if you want to support our podcast and all the work of Abortion Access Front, like, subscribe, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills.